science director at the Watershed Alliance. Our director would be here today, but she's out on family vacation, so good for her. So we're very excited today to host Dr. Brian House from the Coastal Systems Program at UMass Dartmouth. He's going to be talking about a multi-year study that we've been working on assessing the health of Cockeast Pond, pretty much. So one other thing is that we'd like to thank our generous donors that helped support the funding of this project. Without support from our members and donors, we couldn't accomplish these sorts of things. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. House.
Yeah, hi, thanks for coming on a Saturday morning. Imagine when my alarm went off this morning at 5. What's going on? But anyway, I'm pleased to be here. We've been working in Cockeast Pond actually with WRWA since 2008, setting up a baseline to sort of understand the general conditions. More recently, though, we worked with the Alliance to work on a more detailed assessment, and it was split into 2 phases for a variety of reasons, and we finished the second phase, and I will be presenting a summary of the first one and the second one. You won't even know, I'm not going to separate them out, but this is the complete study for that. However, we're also continuing the work because we're moving into management option and modeling phase, and so that will be continuing it. Down the road, I think we'll be asking for input from stakeholders about what their opinions on what they would like to see done. Okay, so I'm going to start, and I should tell you that I don't do anything really other than talk. I have everybody else do the work, and they're all listed here. And actually, we also have another SMAST scientist here who did the modeling so far, Model Sunnymer, sitting up here. Okay, the problem, and I'm going to have to review a little bit because I know not all of you, I don't know all your names, but I recognize a lot of faces, and I know that some people were at the previous one, but I see new faces here too. So I'm going to go back and just give you a quick summary of the whole thing. Whole talk should take about 15 minutes, okay? But interrupt me if I tend to slip into jargon sometimes, and I can't stand it if people can't follow what I'm saying because I said just a quick jargony word and you don't know what it means. So just speak up. I teach you UMass, you understand. You can just interrupt me anytime you want, everybody else does. All right, so just like all of the other estuaries and salt ponds in Buzzards Bay area region, Cockeast Pond is really threatened by nutrient loading. That's the major problem. It's mainly nitrogen loading. And the problem with nitrogen loading is, as you will see from the actual data from Cockeast Pond that I'll show, that Cockeast Pond is severely impaired. Just like many, many other estuaries in southeastern Massachusetts are degraded by excess nutrients. Okay, and it's nitrogen in this point. When you add nitrogen to a system, and all those up arrows mean all these things are happening in Cockeast, or happened in Cockeast, I guess I should say. You start adding nitrogen into this system by development, any kind of development, not just houses, but anything, farming, golf courses, lawn fertilizers, roadways, all of those things add nutrients in. First thing that happens, you start getting algal blooms, and the waters get turbid, and you start losing, in this case, eelgrass beds, which is so much of a problem for Cockeast, and the fact they haven't been there for years, as you'll see why. And the reason is it was closed up until 2010 for a number of years, and that's what caused that. But you start losing then the benthic populations, the animal. And the problem is the benthic animals are the base of the food chain for estuaries. The fish feed on them, the birds feed on them, everything feeds on them that we deem valuable, okay? So it's the base of the food chain. When you lose those, then you lose all those other things too. And shellfish are benthic animals for the most part, so you would lose those as well. And then you start getting a little oxygen in the water, so you see fish kills. There's a fish kill in Cockeast a number of years ago, actually. So that's already happened there. Macroalgae accumulations. I'll show you some pictures, but you've probably seen them out there. You've seen them yourself. And then at very high levels, it's just a mess, and it doesn't even look good. You don't even want to sit there and look at it. And we're reaching that phase. This is Cockeast here in the summer of 15. Get a better example here. This is the sand here, and all of this is drifted in macroalgae, which is just algae that you can pick up as opposed to phytoplankton, which is really small, and the sheets of things. And you don't even want to use the beach at that point. And that's what I mean by loss of aesthetic. So we've gone through that whole sequence in Cockeast, and now you're at this phase. And all that's not land over there, that's actually more microalgae just floating out. Now it's 15. So what do you need to clean it up? All estuaries, even Cockeast, you have to manage that nitrogen. Nitrogen is the problem, and you got to manage the nitrogen. How do you do that? We usually manage it by controlling the amount of watershed input, because that's where it comes from, or the rate of flushing. If you can flush it out, especially in this case where it discharges on the ebb tide to Westport Harbor, which is right near the inlet and goes out to the bay, that would be great, because the bay can accommodate that without the bay getting degraded. Cockeast just needs to get rid of some of those nutrients or have less going in. And it says, but we need nitrogen targets for planting. Well, let's reset one of those for Cockeast and do this. You should know this is Cockeast Pond down here, but all of Westport went through the Massachusetts Estuaries Project and has nitrogen thresholds already set for it. They're in the regulatory with DEP and EPA. They're under the Clean Water Act. They've been codified for this system. And those are the restoration targets for this system. We use many of the same approaches to do like a mini Westport river system for Cockeast Pond. We use the same approaches and actually many of the same people. Oh, and a threshold just means you want to keep the nutrient levels below that. If you pass it for a minute, that's fine. But if you pass it for a couple days, weeks, months, then you're over the limit, and the threshold really means a threshold. You don't want to go over that. The threshold is defined as the amount that you can put in to build the concentration up with no effect, no effect, no effect, and then it starts degrading. When you cross the threshold, it starts to go downhill. So you don't want to cross the threshold. It's our target. Yeah.
Why are there two thresholds?
Oh, because these two systems, while they are connected, they're very much operating independently in some ways. They're very different systems. This West Branch is very shallow, has UMass in it, but it has this connection to the bay out here that water does not go usually from here down here and then back up into there. Some does, but not very much. So in fact, you can restore one arm of this system without totally restoring the other arm. And so we set two thresholds, okay? So in other words, you can go to work here and hit that threshold, and this system would be mainly fixed at that point. If we just add that one, then this one, you wouldn't know what was going on. It's very common. Some systems have so many subbasins, like Pleasant Bay on Cape Cod, that there's two thresholds in that one, but there's 8 check basins for benthic inflow. Those also have to be met. So in order to qualify for restoration, you have to hit 10 numbers, because it's a monstrous bay with dozens of little coves and ponds. So Cockeast Pond, what really is it? And you guys know what it is, you live here, but as scientists look at it, they will describe it as well. It's a tributary to Westport Harbor and to Westport River Estuary. It's a small, shallow basin. It is relatively small. It's well mixed horizontally, so you can look around the pond and the water is mixed. There's not much of a difference up and down the pond horizontally. It's like a lake. Lakes are the same. There's minimal tidal flushing in this system. You can go through the culvert. We'll see a lot about that in a second. And it has a very high water residence time. Westport River has a residence time, I can't remember exactly, but maybe 10 days, something like that. This is 100 days. It needs 100 days, 105. So very long residence time of water in there. And the problem with high residence time is it allows, if you have a small amount of watershed input and the water stays there a really long time, then the levels build up high. So you don't have to have a monstrous nitrogen input from the watershed. You just have such a long residence time. The ship comes into port and you're loading stuff on it, and the longer the ship stays there, it keeps getting loaded and loaded and loaded. This one, ship is sunk. Okay.
Why do you call it a salt pond?
It is a salt pond. It's got salt water in it. It's a pond.
Well, it's mostly fresh.
No, it's not. It's about half. It's brackish. But if it was a fresh pond, right, it would have freshwater organisms and fish and plants in it. If it's a brackish, all salt ponds on Cape Cod and in this region are brackish. All of them. None of them are 32 parts per thousand. They tend to run around 20 for the top end, and maybe down as like this max. Because the new culvert in 2010 did make a difference. That's just show the numbers. Okay, but that's why. I mean, it's just by definition. I didn't make up the definition. That's why. All right, there's seasonal, very strong seasonal variations in water quality. I think there's very strong seasonal variations in all estuaries.
Sorry, could you make sure we heat facing this way up?
I will do that.
Oh,
Yes.
that would be great, thank you.
And it's very vulnerable. This pond is vulnerable to large storm surges, but they only occur on very long-term basis. So every 40 years, 50 years, we get a big enough surge that we can dump some water over the barrier reef from Buster filling into the pond. And the reason that's important is if you wanted to make a freshwater pond, you say, heck with this salt stuff, let's make it fresh, real fresh. You can't, because periodically you're going to get storms, you're going to put salt water in it, so it goes fresh and then salt. You can have a system that goes fresh and then salt and then fresh, and we've studied these. When it goes from fresh to salt, everything dies. Because salt is the reason salt is toxin to freshwater organisms. It creates osmosis, they all die. And then it slowly gets, get a big pulse of salt, and slowly gets fresher, going through these transitional species, you get algals, it's horrible, and then eventually it gets fresh maybe in 20 or 30 years, it gets fresh again, and then it's going to salt pulse. And then it goes dead again. So that's why we tried, although we could just let nature take its course, nothing is natural in this system now, but if you did that, you're going to get this boom bust system that nobody's going to like to even look at. So all of the people that I know and all the salt ponds in southeastern Massachusetts are trying to be managed to make sure they get enough flushing and to keep a sort of stable system so it becomes a valuable resource to the community. The idea of this whole project is trying to make this a valuable resource to the community, more valuable than it is today. Right now, what we've seen is we have this, it is highly restricted, but it doesn't really even get both tides a day. You know, it gets a little bit of tide and nothing, and then a little bit of tide and nothing. It's very eutrophic, which means highly nutrient enriched. When you see the word eutrophic, it is not a desirable state in the United States. It is a desirable trait in China when you're trying to grow fish, but you wouldn't want to even be near the fish ponds that they have in China. So we try to like to see clean water and fish and birds. That's what we think of as quality. Eutrophic conditions are not that way. There's a lot of algal blooms, there was fish killed. In fact, these are fish, dead fish, and this fish. And there's a high coverage in the system, as you'll see, of macrophages and macro. I'm not going to go through all these, but we have a list of the major things that are going on and have gone on in Cockeast Pond historically. And what we really have is for us for today is that in 2006 there's a culvert installed because there's a black metal culvert that connected the pond to Westport Harbor. That wasn't so successful, so it was actually done again in 2010. It's been reseeded. I'll show you the effects of that process. In 2008, again, we started working with WRWA to set up a monitoring program of water quality in the pond, which has continued to this day, because you have to track the water quality over time for two reasons. One, first you have to set a baseline so you know what's going on. The second thing is, if you're going to start trying to improve things, you need a baseline from which to see the improvement. So it's setting up a metric for able to gauge success of action. Phase 1 we started, which is what I'll talk about today. In 16, phase 2 started. I've already presented data on phase 1 and phase 2. You'll hear both of them today. And most importantly, we actually started working with WRW and us to work on an EPA research project looking at restoration tools. And also as part of that, the School for Marine Science and the Coastal Systems Program have selected Cockeast as a natural laboratory, which brings significant resources, scientific resources, and management resources to the project at no cost to the taxpayers of the Westport. So it's that we've selected this as some place that we're going to be studying over a long period of time, graduate students, other research projects, aiming specifically at restoration of this pond and the effects of the actions taken in the watershed or at the inlet. We also have EPA got interested, and they put in funds for us to test different restoration tools that are available in southeastern Massachusetts to be expanded out nationally. And one they're interested in is most interested in right now is the use of aquaculture to remove nutrients from estuaries, both flowing estuaries and salt ponds. There's a variety of projects we're doing around southeastern Mass. There's many towns, there's 8 towns now that are deploying on their own dime millions of oysters and different embayments to look at the positive effects that could be garnered through this economic method. Phase 1, we looked at the water quality, as I said. We measured water levels in the pond for a couple of years. We measured the basin shape of the pond because we have to know the volume of it and what's the depth of it so that we can gauge the effects of wind and mixing. And if you know the volume, then you can calculate the residence time when you know how much water is going in and out. And then we looked at the exchange through this inlet, and we also had a look at the benthic animals because that is our main way to gauge if the pond is healthy or not. We finished all of that, and now we're finished doing obviously more chlorophyll. More chlorophyll is a surrogate for phytoplankton. We've continued the water quality monitoring. We also had a look at the regeneration of nutrients from the bottom because what happens in these systems is when plants grow and phytoplankton fall to the bottom and they die, and then they decompose, and those nutrients are re-released to the water column. It's not new nitrogen when it comes in. It's new when it enters from the watershed or from the ocean. But when it comes off the bottom, it goes up, and then it gets used up, it goes back down. It's a recycling of nutrients. But the phytoplankton don't know that. They know just what the nitrogen is in the water column. So if you have a lot of recycling, it means you get more going in and you get more phytoplankton, bigger blooms. So this is a major concern for management. The good news is if you lower the load or increase the flushing, this automatically drops. So you don't have to directly modify that. You modify that by modifying the inputs and the outputs. We also, one of the things that people are very interested in, last time I talked about this, very interested in our land use loads and how we calculate and derive those loads. I will talk as much as you want about that when I get there. And then we developed a model so that we can start testing scenarios. We don't model things to get the answer. We know the answer. The point is we set up a model, a numerical model of how the system works. When it's all calibrated and validated, then you can start changing things. We turn off the fertilizer input, we turn off the septic input, we increase the flushing, and you can predict then, once it's set up and running and accurate, then you can start just tuning things mathematically to figure out where you might put your invest to get the biggest effect. Is it better to spend money on the inlet, or is it better to spend money on some other management tool? So that's what the model's used for. It doesn't come up with anything new. It is a tool to get us to the next step, which is management and improvement of the pond. And then we're continuing, and it's continuing because we don't come up with a management plan for this pond. We develop the tools to develop the management plan. We run some of our own, hey, what if we did this kind of scenarios? But it is the citizens of this region and the stakeholders of the pond who are supposed to be getting input into this about what they want as the different options put together to do the restoration. It's not us, you know. So like if somebody came in and said, hey, we'll sewer the whole thing, probably they'll be murdered. But the other thing is we wouldn't support that anyway because that would not be worth the money. And that's what the modeling would do. So we did do some preliminary modeling, which I'll show you. All right, very quickly, these are 2 monitoring sites in the pond for water quality, and there's the outlet from between Westport Harbor and the pond is here. I'll refer to that a lot. Now, there's been management already in the sense of putting in new culverts to increase flushing, and what you saw was over here, 2007, 8, there was a 9, I think, but anyway, whatever that is. In here, the pond was very fresh. This is salinity. That's 2 parts per thousand. That's less than 1 part per thousand. That's almost fresh, but it isn't fresh, but it's almost fresh. And this was sort of predates me. In this period, 2010 really it was, there was an inlet was put in. The old culvert that had collapsed had been replaced. New inlet was put in, culvert was put in, and the salinity went way up. Okay? Now, I don't know whether this is the collapsed inlet repair or whether this is just the resetting. Okay, this was when the metal one was placed over here, but it didn't have any effect because the salinity stayed low, and then it was reset. In other words, it pulled out, dug out, stuck back in, retopped, and you did actually get some salt water in the pond. It tends to be variable. It's variable. We now have enough data. It's not really very clearly shown here, but it's typically fresher in spring and salter in summer. And the reason for that is this pond is driven by freshwater inputs mainly, because there's hardly any tidal exchange. So in spring, you get a lot of freshwater go in, so the salinity drops, and in summer, there's hardly any freshwater going in, so the salinity rises. That's the battle between freshwater in and saltwater in from the inlet. So in peak summer, the inlet wins. In spring, the freshwater in wins. This is just to show that what I said about horizontal mixing, the easiest way to show it is you measure salinity at those two distant sites from each other. This is a one-to-one line. If you fall on a line, it means the two sites are giving the same salinity. So there's not a difference, meaning there's no horizontal. There's a stream. Streams enter mainly in the northeast side of the pond. So if there is a reason you might think there would be a difference in salinity or a difference in work, but there isn't, because all these points, and these are just the different dates that we measure. But the point is they're not different, so we don't have to worry about horizontal differences in this one.
16, we didn't get any rain.
Yeah, 16 actually was just 16 didn't get any rain. 16 was the end of 4 years of not much rain.
Right, so therefore, I mean, 17 is an interesting.
Oh no, we have the same thing for 15, 16, and 17, but I decided I can only make so many new graphs for this thing today. But it's all available, all that data. All right, people are interested in, well, there's a lot of nitrogen in the pond. Yeah, there's a lot of nitrogen in the pond. When I talk about total nitrogen, it is composed of the inorganic plant nutrients, dissolved organic, which is DON, particulate organic, which is PON, and then DIN is dissolved organic. That's the one that's immediately available to the plants. In the pond water, I put this up just so people's eyes glaze over, but the real thing is this pie diagram, which just shows
Excuse me, sir. The DIN is what's the name of your
DIN is dissolved inorganic, which is ammonium and nitrates. This thing's we worry about for as plant fertilizers. Okay? Good? Huh?
I got it.
I knew you did.
I just didn't quite hear it.
There's an echo too, from up here. All right, so most of the nitrogen that enters the pond, especially in groundwater, is coming in as inorganic. The reason it's all organic is it's been taken up by plants and converted into organic forms. And if you look at the pond, it's green, and those are the organic, some of the organic forms. When the organic forms break down, they release dissolved organics, which just hang around over a period of time. They tend to be long-lived. We don't worry so much about this fraction. It's these two, which are the very active fractions that cause real problems. This is your 16. Who said 16? Did you say 16?
I said 17.
No, 16 was low.
Low,
rain.
yeah, no
right.
rain.
We're good. So what you see is 16 was the lowest freshwater inflow into the pond, I think, in the entire record, because it was the end of a 4-year drought. You see there's a big spike in nitrogen. You say, well, there's less freshwater going in. Yeah, but there's less flushing of the pond. The pond was not flushing in 16 because most of the flushing is the freshwater pushing out. And so what we see is a spike in nitrogen because it built up. That's all. It's that simple. And the purple is the organic, not particularly organic, and the red is that big fraction of dissolved, which we don't worry about too much. But that's a big spike. This is the concentration in Westport Harbor, just for reference, okay, the total. So the top of these bars in Westport Harbor make that line. Right? Very much higher, okay, and you can see that I don't have to bang that one home. And Westport Harbor is pretty good. I mean, Westport Harbor is in good shape. So if Cockeast looked like Westport Harbor, I would be somewhere else there. Okay, the other thing, what happens, right, this is 16 again, is that we get these big, this is chlorophyll, which is a surrogate for just the amount of phytoplankton we got. So the more chlorophyll, the more phytoplankton, the less. 10 is this red line, and that is used as the maximum limit for showing significant impairment of a system by nutrients. Buzzards Bay, Project Buzzards Bay Coalition, if you have over 10 micrograms per liter chlorophyll average in your summer, then you're highly impaired. And so as you see, it's lower in the spring, makes sense, less light, colder, come into summer and bang, every point is above that line by at least 50% with a big bloom. We had a huge bloom in July in 16. we were asked to do some traditional stuff that we don't usually do, but we were asked to do it, so we did it. There's two ways to look at the pond because it's relatively low salinity. We used a freshwater metric, which is this Carlson trophic index. If it's a high number, it's bad. If it's a low number, it's good. Nationally recognized method. And what we see is if it's over 50, it's eutrophic, and every number, that number, which is the GSM, 50, 50, 50, they're all over 50. So regardless of what metric you take, this standard says this system is eutrophic. It's not in good shape. We take the Bay Health Index, which is for Buzzards Bay, is developed for, help develop that. And what we see is it's, in that case, if it's under, we're going to hate this, 67 or 70, under that, then it's impaired. If it's down to 37, it's highly impaired. It's poor. So I'm just trying to drive home the point that it's not some sort of esoteric exercise. We're looking at this, and oh geez, there's problems with your pond. There's problems with your pond. And the thing is that you're proactive, so we keep everybody off trying to drive the plan because you're making your own plan. And the towns that make their own plans for restoration have a much better deal, and they get it done quicker and cheaper, a lot cheaper, than if somebody else comes in and say, hey, that's impaired. Goes to DEP, and says they need to fix this pond. The Clean Water Act specifies they need to fix this pond. All right. One of the things we had to do was we had to look at the stream into the pond. This is the that's the northeast top, northwest top, where there's a big stream in it, not big stream, it's the major stream enters Cockeast, goes under this bridge. We actually looked at flows here and here to see about the stream pickup, but the bottom line is we monitored that site for about 2 years. So we didn't just monitor during 16 when the flow was a little lower. We have multiple years of stream data. When we did that, this is the blue line is the derived curve from our continuous record of stream flow and stage. The red dots are point measurements, so we went out and actually measured. These all look low, they are a little bit, but they sort of are at the bottom end of all these dips. So when we worked it all out, it seemed to work out that we can actually, on an annual basis, at least capture the flow, and on a seasonal basis, we'll capture the flow quite well. This one's a crazy graph right here. Here's that same graph, and this is the concentration of total nitrogen in that water. The only reason I show this is when the flow goes down, see these peaks, and then it goes low, and then these peaks, the flow goes down, the concentration of total nitrogen goes up. The end effect of that is the load into the pond is the combination of how much water goes in and how much nitrogen in that water that goes in. Right? It's what it carries. And because of this, we're getting a relatively constant amount of nitrogen flowing into this pond year round. That's all this means. All right, here's the one. I will take questions at any time on this. When the MVP did Cockeast Pond, it was doing all the Westport River Watershed. It did not go into a big refined deal for little Cockeast Pond. When we did this, we did a big refined deal for Cockeast Pond. In fact, the guy who did it just walked in, sitting in the back. And he also did all of the MVP for us, with us, on the same team. So what we did for this is what we did. That's the great lab we. What Roberta did was go out, look at all the lots. This is a parcel-based analysis. Look at every parcel that's in your assessor's database. And look what's on it. Use what the assessor says on it, actually on it. What kind of, if it's agriculture, what kind of agriculture? If there's animals, what kind of animal husbandry you do here, and how many you have. And the town keeps records as well, so does the state, more or less. All those were pulled together because you can't always trust the records that you get from other people. So why not just go to the farmers and the people in Westport and ask them? So they told us. So we went to that level because it's a small watershed. There's not that many farms. There's not that many houses. So we could check each one and get for this is the main basin of Cockeast, and then this is just, there's a little stream watershed. Streams have watersheds too, so we separate out the stream watershed. And we're getting about 1,700 kilos a year going into Cockeast Pond from its watershed. This is in the report, and it is broken down and explained. And then also rain's a relatively big number for this because the pond has a very big water sheet and a very small watershed. So that contributes about another third as well of nitrogen in the pond. But we're not going, unless we're going to put a bubble over it, we're going to go to Cleveland and knock down all the factories or in power plants, we're stuck with that number. We can only control 1,700 from the watershed. And we can't even control all of that because some of it is from wetlands and natural surfaces like unfertilized fields or forests, things like the forested areas. Those put out a little bit of nitrogen, tiny little bit, so we account for that too, because we want to account for everything. And so we looked in and we went and the nice thing was that WRWA, Deborah Weaver and Tom went, the president went and actually got in and dealt with the Coastal Club. They were very good, very helpful. They opened their books and they gave tours of their management system. We have studied over 20 golf courses in southeastern Massachusetts. And I'll tell you, this is one of the best managed ones because they do water recovery. Most of them, they do a little bit, but they don't just let the water run off into the pond. They capture it and reuse it. They are very careful with their fertilizer management. And so feeling in a way that's bad, because if that was the problem, easy to fix. They could just go from bad to this, what they're doing now. Unfortunately, if it's good, then we can't get much lower nitrogen coming out of that. See what I mean? So the problem is that it's also relatively small. It's only 10% of the load from the watershed. And it's on the order of lawn fertilizers are bigger. Wastewater is still small. 500 is a really small, that's our septic system. It's still a really small load into the system, but it is the dominant load into this system. But it's not big. So again, we're not going to be able to knock off everything with just that. And again, I said, proposing sewering is not on the table right now for us. Yes?
I'm sorry, I'm having trouble seeing. So wastewater is what percentage?
30. Wastewater is about, it's a little less than, it's about 30%, 29%.
So that's not
And that's
big.
that.
That's a big.
It is, but when you look at lawn fertilizers, they're half of what that is. This is lawn fertilizer. And if you look at animal husbandry, it's 300 versus 500. See, you're not going to get there with that. This pond is super overloaded. It's 3 times higher than it should be. And so we need to get a much bigger reduction than any one of these. That's why you have to know that any one of these alone will get it. It means you're going to have to do a couple of things. So we pick and choose. Right? That's what we always do because we're Yankees. Yeah.
Where are the farm animals? Yeah, that's what I'm
The one that says farm animals. It's really hard to see, but if it's
on the land.
it's what?
Where are they on the land?
Chase Road,
Yes.
Chase Road?
I'm sorry.
Ross
Road.
Road.
Sorry, I don't live in the neighborhood. Just looking at maps.
But-
Cross Road,
yeah.
top of the watershed. There's a bit of cattle, some sheep. We heard directly from the property owner, and he gave us pretty accurate counts.
It's nobody has a lot.
Yes, huh?
Who asked? You asked. Nobody has a lot of them, but it seems like a lot of people have a few. And so, you know what I mean? And so it's like it just sort of adds up to being a fair amount. In a normal world, Esther, 1,600 kilos is not very much total either. I'm used to seeing a little sub-basin in 1,500. I'm sorry, 5,000.
Well, what strikes me is that Crossroad is, what, a mile or so above, and it's coming down through quite a bit of stream cleaning, whereas the lawn and the...
I don't know the stream cleaning on that.
Well, that they go through something that...
Any animals that are within the watershed to that stream, measure. We actually measured what comes out of that stream. So if there was any stream cleaning of animals, it was taken out in the measurement because we used the actual measurement in the pond as the load from that little sub-watershed. That's why we broke out the stream watershed where we can measure what comes out versus the normal watershed.
Can I just finish?
Oh yeah, I'm getting old. I can only remember questions in sequence, so I give the floor back to you.
That was my long preamble. The lawns and the golf course are right adjacent versus, from what you say, the animals are a mile away. And is there not some difference in impact?
Not if it's groundwater. If it goes into groundwater, the groundwater pretty much, once it reaches the groundwater, it goes pretty much unattenuated to the receiving waters. And there's, let's say, $500 million worth of research in this region alone on that process, and that's the conclusion of that research. So, scientists, many institutions, USGS, Woods Hole, have all done those studies and concluded what I just said. Plus, when we look at stream outputs, we did studies where you have a subwatershed of a stream. In the wintertime, there's not much stream attenuation. At night, in the wintertime, there's no attenuation in the stream. So guess what the graduate students are out doing? They're out measuring stream flows in the dark, in the winter, on streams, so they could match up and make sure that the estimates which are in the watershed are actually what's coming out, because there's no attenuation for that month or two. Right? Okay. This is, by the way, the models that we use have been developed over the last 30 years, okay, for this region alone. They don't work in Texas, but they work to develop.
Brian?
Yeah.
I'm not sure I understand completely how farm animals are getting waste are getting into groundwater if they are basically pastured animals. And how do you get cow manure into groundwater?
It depends on how you're actually in concentration. So, I mean, that's the manure. So, if it is in fact covered, you're less likely to have it get into the groundwater. If it's not covered, anytime it rains, you're going to get percolation. It's going to go down into the ground. We've actually gone to the point of looking at how you handle the waste product. If an animal, for example, is out in a pen, you're going to get the urine related to that. That's going to go to the groundwater. If they actually, different kinds of animals, you actually train them to go in their stalls, then you're going to have that with the manure. So it really gets into really fine details about how that goes. What we have done is looked at the animals, haven't gone in and looked at each individual farmer to see how they're doing, but these are the animal counts, and we've got loads based on animal husbandry studies and all that sort of stuff. We'll actually look at the amount that comes out.
What is the depth of groundwater?
Yes, just a minute.
What is the depth of the ground? Depends where you're in the watershed. If you're standing at the edge of Cockeast Pond, the groundwater is right there, almost at the surface. If you go up on the hill, like by Cockeast, you're up pretty high, then the groundwater is much lower. But there's not that much uptake in the unsaturated zone. There is some, but that's all calculated into, because we are mainly, what we focus on is what, as I said earlier, what reaches the groundwater. If you put it on the surface of the land, like if you're pasturing your animals and they poop, which they do, then you will get less nitrogen of what they discharge, because some will be taken up by the plant, but some will be taken up by bacteria that are in there and food as well. So we factor all of that stuff in. And if you guys are going to keep going too much on farm animals, the recommendation is just check to see if everybody has BMPs and if they can be improved and if we can get some money for them. There is no target at all on any agriculture in the restoration plan for this pond because it's not a big enough source and it's too diffuse. Yes?
Also, I have a hard time believing that a lot of the landowners around Cockeast Pond or nearby, and maybe a lot of them use a lot of lawn fertilizers. I just don't know.
We didn't see any excessive fertilizers. But if you're growing crops, you use fertilizer.
Use fertilizers. I really don't think most of them use lawn fertilizers.
You're talking farms, so we switch to lawns?
I guess, just for a second.
You can do anything you want. I just need to, I can't answer if I don't understand the question, so we switch to lawn. me answer your question, if any more questions.
No, I guess we'll go back to farm animals.
I feel like, you know, a little kid wants to say,
No, she's saying that, her observation is there, a lot of the property owners don't use much
okay,
fertilizer.
yeah, there you go. And the MVP, and when we started that project, the general regulatory thing was just to assume that someday everybody's going to use 100% fertilizer and all that stuff. We don't do that. We go and we account for the more than half the people don't use fertilizers. I don't remember the exact number, but it's more than half don't use any, and virtually no one uses what's written on the Scott's bag, which is 4 fertilizations a year to amount. So you got half don't fertilize at all. The other 40%, that's more than enough. So fertilize some, but maybe once a year, maybe twice a year, do 4 times a year. So our fertilizer loads in this site-specific site are so much lower than what would be a Scott's bag fertilization, which is master fertilization. We've already tried to take into account by doing surveys, thousands of surveys in this region, to take into account what we just observed and said is correct. It is, I get it now.
If I could just add, the other factor that comes into play with lawns is just by having a lawn instead of a forested area, you're changing how much nitrogen is taken up in the soil, even just from rainwater. A forest floor takes up a lot of nitrogen. What's the percent, Brian?
It's 98%.
Of the nitrogen in the rainwater. By having a lawn, that uptake doesn't happen. Even if you don't fertilize your lawn, rainwater will add more nitrogen than it would on a forest floor. So that's part of this lawn. It's not just lawn fertilizer, it's just lawn numbers, right?
Yes.
I think you said that the load on the pond is about 3 times higher.
No, I said it's about a third of the watershed.
A
The
third.
watershed load is 3 times the direct deposition of the pond. The watershed load is about 1,600 and something, around 80, and the load on the direct downstream is about 500 and small change. So 500 versus 1,700.
The question I really want to go to is if you look at the thing just from the input side, how much would you have to remove from everything that's going in there?
It works like this. I'm going to make you sit through the pond. No person can actually do that if you work. You need to actually be able to account for how much you have to remove depends on how quickly it gets flushed out.
Yeah.
If the pond flushed once a day, you hardly have to remove anything.
No, but with the current flush out, it looks like to me.
Oh, come on. I had all these people working day and night for 3 years on this, and I'm going to show you why. All right. I'm not going to go through this, but just suffice to say that I'm going to be talking about this recycling, and the main reason is because the sediments release ammonium, which is a fertilizer. They release nitrate, which is a fertilizer, and they also release dissolved organic nitrogen, which I'm going to see here. But the point is that they release. Now, sometimes they can take up, sometimes they release. On an annual basis, the sediments take up more nitrogen than they release because there's some gets buried. Some goes off as nitrogen gas. The problem is, in this study, and I'll jump to the chase on this one, is that what we found here is in the summertime, when everything's terrible out there and it's nitrogen overloaded, the sediments do not take up as much as they release more. So in the summertime, they're a net source, and in the wintertime, they're a net sink. The problem is that we're not worried about algal blooms and fish kills in the winter. We're worried about them in the summer, and that's when we get this release. So in order to calculate how much you have to remove, as you asked, you have to account for this too. It's not just external sources, there's this internal problem. It's recycling, but it's still internal. So we went out, we looked at all these sites, we looked at the sediments trying to distribute around the pond, capture different sediments. As it ends up, this is muddy up here mainly, sandy down here. It's not pure sand, it's not pure mud, but it's much softer up in this region, sandier, fine, organic. The rates we found don't mean anything to anybody but my people in this room. But the thing is, during the critical July-August period, when we're trying to get the pond healthy, the net release of nitrogen from the sediments pond-wide equals 27% of the total watershed input. It's a big number. Okay? So it's almost approaching the wastewater number on an annual basis. But the wastewater number gets divided by 12, and it was only 500, and so now it's like 50, and this is adding another 25% of the total watershed level for those 2 months when things are crumbling. It's one of the reasons things are crumbling. Okay, we also, so that's the internal and the external loads, and then the internal cycling. We have this problem here with the tidal outlet, right? We did a bunch of tidal flux runs where people stand here for about 14, 15 hours straight, taking water samples of volumetric volume in, the volume out, and what's in it. Because from what's in it, you can calculate the number of kilograms or pounds of nitrogen in and the number of pounds of nitrogen out. You can figure out what's going on. Here's the problem with Cockeast. This is from one of those runs. This is the tide range. We've all seen tide charts, you know, if you say all this stuff. This is the tide range in Westport Harbor, pretty healthy, right? This is the tide range, which isn't really, the tides don't even hardly show up all the time, that's in Cockeast Pond. So it's highly restricted. If the red one looked like the blue one, again, I would be somewhere else. But it's not, it's very small restriction, and much of the peak flows in this are because of wind. When you get a big wind from the southwest, going from the southwest, high velocity wind, it pushes the pond water out of the pond. If you get a nice tide in the harbor, like one of these spring tides here, and the wind's blowing from the southwest, you don't get much salt water in. If it's blowing from the northeast that day, then you get a lot of salt water. And this pond is almost impossible to deal with the tide because there's so little flow through that gully. But just, this is important not because it's only important to let you know what happens if you increase the culvert. This is just a tide height in the channel, but over a tidal cycle. What you see, the tide height in the channel is low, 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 low. Now in the harbor, it's going up and down, going up, or going actually in the ebb, it's going down, 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 but you don't even see it in the channel because the channel's bottomed out. There's a trickle only coming out of the pond. During flood, you get this big pulse of water into the pond. The blue one is flow. Blue one. The big pulse of water into the pond here, but it's only for about an hour or two. And then it ebbs for this long period of time until you get another flood. So we get like a 1-2 hour flood on a good day into the pond, and that's why it's so low salinity. Yeah.
So this is the flow going to the culvert?
Yeah, this is going out, and this
so
is
that's
going in.
So
And
below zero, it's going out of the pond, and then above zero, it's going into the pond.
Exactly, and then for me, because I'm getting older, I wrote ebb and flood there, so I can remember that this is going in, and this is ebbing is going out.
And it's, so the quantity of the water going in or out, how does it compare, the ebb versus the flow?
I have to put you on the paper. This is the volume, we have 3 dates, this is the flow in, 200, 500, 900, those are the numbers. This is the flow out, 300 more than 200, 1,200 more than 500, 5,000 more than 1,000. A lot more water going out. How can this be? Well, it's because all the fresh water going into the pond has to leave too.
It's good going out.
Yeah, but the problem is that we're not getting the same flushing. A normal pond would have all this water going in. It would have many times this amount going in, and that also would flow out. You know, you think of Westport Harbor, the water flows in, and the water goes up, and then it drains out, and you're mixing and flushing all of that bad stuff out.
I'm running a pond, two down, that has a naturally doesn't reach. Yeah. So there's no real, there's inflow of fresh water,
Yeah.
but no real outflow except for maybe 5 times a year. So, and it, you know, it's a different, has very different numbers.
Yeah.
So, you know, so it's interesting. Yeah.
I thought it was interesting.
It is interesting.
All right, so the one thing you get, the reason we talk about flushing is this is the salt concentration that flows out. Okay, I think it's a salt concentration of salt and water flowing out, very fresh, less than 10 in this case on this day. This is the salinity of the water flowing in, goes up over 30, which is, you know, Westport River, it's high salt. And then this is again on the next tide flowing out, very low again. If we get a bigger flood period, we're going to get more salt and constantly is going to go up a bit. We're not ever going to get this salt pond up to 24 or something. It's not going to happen. It's not even clear we ever want to do that, but we've got to get it above this where it goes up and down between 8 and 10 and 20.
I don't understand what one or two factors you can influence on this change. I mean, it's hard to get more fresh water coming in.
I'll pretend I'm Bill Clinton. You said the two factors to change it in.
To nitrogen levels.
Oh, you can only, there's only really two mechanisms, and then within the mechanisms there's a little subset. You can change what comes in. How much?
More fresh water.
No, we're talking nitrogen. How much? We're not going to affect the freshwater animal. Probably we're pretty well stuck with the so we have
less nitrogen.
but we want less nitrogen coming in because if it doesn't come in as fast, it doesn't build up, or we can increase the rate it goes out, so it can't build up as much. And we've done this, and you guys, this isn't only salt pond. We've been working on this stuff for decades.
So that culvert is already increased
A little bit.
a little bit.
Well, actually significantly, but not enough
Not
to do it.
good.
And you should know, the reason that you hear about pond openings on the vineyard and in Cockeast is because they're closed and they open them up to flush out the nutrients and get in salt. That's why
So
they
you're
do.
saying we can't do much more as far as.
Oh, yeah, you can. All right, so we're going to just look at the metrics. You need to have metrics. And so one of the things we did at the water quality stations, we put in continuous recorders, because people always say, well, you missed something, or so we put out recorders for a month or two that record every 15 minutes oxygen and chlorophyll. When we record other things too, but I'm going to show us. This is oxygen, goes up and down a lot. Water quality standard would be around here. This line, which actually is shifted down somehow when I was screwing around the slide, it's up here actually, but this touches it and this goes below it. Short periods of time where it drops below into the level that is called the instantaneous level you can't drop below because you've now caused huge stress to organisms. If you're in the above 4 or so, you cause stress, but yeah, it goes away. And in this case, I'm not worried about this piece over here, this piece. I'm worried about that piece and this piece. And regulatorily you're out, but also organism-wide you're out. Chlorophyll is easier. This is that line of you don't want to go above the line. Above the line indicates impairment, and there's a lot of time points above that line. Long periods of time, it's above the line. And that line is 10, and these point, that's the 20 line, and it's going over 20. Very big blooms occur in this pond periodically. This is another year, this is 16, that was 15. And what we have is, again, big oxygen decline in mid-August. Little declines here, but big decline in August. It's enough to kill things, decline. That's where you'd see a fish kill. And then that's one station, this is the other station. A lot more at the southern station because it's deeper. Okay? It's the only reason it's deeper. This is just the bottom water. It's not the water column, it's just the very bottom where the animals breathe that are living in the mud. Same thing, above the line impaired. Clearly it's impaired. I don't want to belabor things. Okay. This is one of the things, though, that is really, really important. Because one of the missions of this restoration is we need to have healthy animals that live in the bottom, healthy communities down there, because that's the source of all of the food source for so many different things. What you see is, this is just, we went out and we collect samples and we pick out every single live organism and we identify the species. Every single, and we count them. And so what you get is the total number of species is like between 3 and 4. The total number of individuals is in the northern area, that muddy area is 61, and the lower area is pretty good, it's 675. So you say, well, that's not so bad, 3 and 600, except a healthy salt pond will have 25 over here and maybe 600, 700 over here. So you got a lot of them, but they're all crummy. They're kind of the ones that's stressed organism. This, you just killed everything. It doesn't matter if there's 61 or 50 or whatever. There's no species hardly because it's supposed to be 25. That number's supposed to be 25 or 20. That's 3. So this is super good. Then we talk about diversity. Everybody wants diverse communities because that means good things, and it does mean good things. A diversity number of 3 is good. 1.5, 1 and 0.5. Evenness, you want to get up above 0.7. Doesn't even get close. So the point is, the metrics that you look at, any metric you look at about what's living in the pond, what can survive these conditions, say that benthic community is severely degraded. That's the regulatory term. It's severely degraded. So it's not all about oxygen meters and chlorophyll and everything. The animals themselves are telling you this is degraded. The other ones, the high chlorophyll, the low oxygen, tell you that it's nitrogen. Now we have other reasons to know it's nitrogen, but those are associated with nitrogen. If you get lower the nitrogen, you won't improve the oxygen. You lower the phytoplankton, you'll improve this. That's the mission. These are some of the guys who love this. Chironomids are the dominant species on the pond, and they are indicator species, accepted indicator species for nutrient enrichment, and they're very brackish. They're not salt water. We do see them in saltwater ponds, but they tend to not like 20 or 18 parts per thousand. And hydrobia is only there's a little snail that lives on the macroalgae because there's so much macroalgae there, right? So you get a lot of those. Those are pretty much all of the order. And then we went out, we also, because people know there's a lot of, they go out there and there's a lot of vegetation. You see it washing on the beach, but you go out there, a lot of vegetation on the bottom, and went out with a video survey, and the guy that did that is there, and this is just a typical bottom picture of the pond. Go through the counts, put it all together. This is the depth of the pond, just so you know. This is the upper pond. It's only about, it's less than a half meter, or less than a meter deep. The lower part of the pond here is where you get deep water, and that little red thing is the deepest water, but that's artificial because of where the inlet is, when the inlet is. But this, white, is sort of areas that have good bottom. Anything that has color means that it's almost completely covered with some sort of plant. Not any good plants. The major ones are widgeon grass and this single pondweed, which aren't really seagrasses. It's Rupia maritima and Cotomageton. Low salinity is where they thrive, and this is bouncing around that. If you get the salinity up, you get rid of these. And then they grow best in slow moving waters, which certainly is Cockeast Pond, and they're all throughout Cockeast. That's what they look like as a mix. And those are areas that color is where anything you see that margin color is those. And so it's a dominant, actually when you get up all those little patches, it's more than half of the vegetated area is that. More than half of the vegetated area. The unvegetated area is. We have these other two, Cladophora and Spirogyra. Cladophora is the classic particle macroalgae that is destroyed in Quake Bay, on the Cape, and other areas. It is an indicator of high nutrient loading, and it's seen as a very, when you have a Cladophora plume, it is a very bad thing. And it's filmed up the screen, and that's this green yellow stuff is the mix of those two. Green and yellow. Okay? So, what do we conclude? From the science, we conclude that the pond has very high nitrogen levels. They're not going away. We've looked at it for years. They're still there. They go up and they go down, but they're always too high. They support recurring phytoplankton blooms, sometimes very high, over 20, 30 micrograms per liter, very, very high. When Buzzards Bay is 3, and the impairment threshold is 10, and you're up to 20, 30, that's not good. Low oxygen, we see low oxygen, that's from the high nitrogen. Macroalgal mats, drift algae on the shore, and then the benthic animal communities is severely degraded. Those are all the things that you have to justify, to have enough certainty that you need to fix nitrogen and not something else. Okay? And that's all of this is to convince you that, yeah, there's a problem, that it is nitrogen, and not to convince you exactly what you have to do, but just you got a problem. And by the way, if you want to get permits for New Inlet, that's all done for you now. We've done all the work to get the permit grants. The new adjusted culvert did improve. Culvert was worth it. It did improve tidal exchange, but it's still very restrictive, and the pond is still impaired. It's just too bad. Water exchange through the pond harbor is affected by wind speed and direction. If that inlet was bigger, it wouldn't be as effective. Right? It's just because the flow is so weak at the inlet that when these other factors can magnify their effect, because they're not very big, but the inlet flow is very low. Inlet flow flow was bigger, those factors wouldn't have the same effect. And then we're just going to end, I'm not going to end this talk with, but I'm going to end this, all the science stuff with, you need multiple nitrogen management options that we looked at, and I'll show you those for the feasibility of pond restoration. It's not going to be one thing. We looked at a whole bunch of things because we don't tell people what to do. We ask them what they think they might want to do, and then we write that down, and then we test it. These are the typical ones that go into towns in this region. They look at increasing tidal flushing, not just in salt ponds like this, but all ponds. Even a big estuary, sometimes there's a restricted tidal, and it's a lot cheaper to do that than to do like sewering or some other thing. In the estuary now, the big thing now is looking at oyster propagation. That's not going to get you it all either. Either is this. And then also fertilizer education means trying to work on the use of fertilizers, not to ban them, right, but just to try to reduce fertilizer use, or maybe do whatever you want. Declare areas nitrogen sensitive and deal with that. It's a lot easier to not throw the fertilizer on the ground than to have to pay to have something else removed. That's the theory. And then also we've been working for forever, since the 90s, on nitrogen removing septic systems, which now some that are becoming, looking like they really do work. And so I'll talk about that. All right. So now what we have to do is, in order to test things, like when somebody said, well, what happens if you said, what if how much do you have to remove? The only way you can balance no mind can figure out the ins and the outs of all the sources, and the flushing, and the sediment regeneration. Nobody can factor that in. So we use models to mathematically make sure everything's inventory and balanced right, so we can answer that question. And the models allow us to say, what if you remove sediment regeneration, or what if you increase the inlet? That's what the models allow you to do. So we have already done a multi-year data collection to understand the linkage between the nutrients from the watershed and the environment of the pond. We've done tidal exchange studies to understand the role of flushing and controlling the nutrient levels and eutrophication in the pond. We did those. We also evaluate, and this is where we're going, to evaluate the plan, the management scenarios, which is management scenarios, well, you fix this, leave the rest alone. That's a scenario. The planned box model, which we were going to do, it's a relatively straightforward thing, and we built one for this. What we found is that we need a more complex numerical model because there's huge seasonality out there. And a box model can't handle that. It would, if this was farm pond on the vineyard, it would handle it. But this ain't farm pond. So we need a complex numerical model. So we can look at the time-changing freshwater input, the time-changing sediment regeneration, the time-changing over the year tidal exchanges, and a very long 30+ day pond water residence time. So the box model cannot handle that. So we went back to WRWA and said, can you give us $50,000? And they said no, so we just decided to come up with that amount. No, I'm kidding. They didn't say no, and we didn't ask them. We just came up with the money because this is now designated as a Coastal Systems Program National Laboratory, so we access funds to get that numerical model done for you. That's my commercial. It's the same approach that was used in the UMass estuaries project. It's already been accepted by US EPA, DEP, and everybody else. It's been used in 70 different estuaries in the region. I'm not worried about it. I'm not going to explain it at this point. The model that we used to evaluate was used to evaluate potential management scenarios, which is what-ifs, for restoring Cockeast Pond, and particularly improvements, the specific improvements in water quality from one, reducing various, not just one, but a whole bunch of different sources in the watershed, just reducing that time. Increasing the tidal exchange rate by 2-fold and 2.7-fold, deploying oyster aquaculture in the pond for in-situ nitrogen removal, which this is validated by field studies going on at Cockeast Pond in Orleans and in Falmouth and in Mashpee. So it's not made up. It's not from a book. It's actually from field studies in this region, including within Cockeast Pond. When we talk about removing components of the watershed, we manipulated the wastewater input in one, the farm animals in one, lawn fertilizers in one, and the golf course fertilizers. We also looked at combinations of these and changes in tidal flushing and with and without oysters. So we did individuals so we could understand who's the big players, and then we did combinations to see how can we get to the target. What we found, and I hope you can read this. Can you read see this? I'll read it. These are the different loads. This is wastewater. When we remove all wastewater, all septic tanks from the system, we're getting about 6.5% reduction in the summer peak. Remember that July, August, that's our management period. We don't care too much about the winter. We care about the summer. You're not getting much. You are getting something though, because you're getting more than if you remove all the lawn fertilizer, you only get a 4% reduction. If you remove all the farm animals, you only get a 4% reduction. And that's if you remove them, you take them out and ship them to Dartmouth. Yeah. And then golf course fertilizer, we're only 2.2%. And they sort of mirror the loads too, okay? The loading stuff table. And then if you remove all fertilizers and half of the wastewater, we do get a big effect because some of it is the timing, okay? But we're still not, we're shooting for about 70%. Oh, that's your answer. We're shooting for about a 70% lowering of the summertime peak, which means that it's got to be around 0.5 rather than 1.7. If we widen the channel, we get actually pretty big bangs for the buck. And 2 times, 3 times, not very much different. I mean, there are big differences here, but those are big numbers compared to these numbers. And then if we deploy 500,000 oysters, we only get 9%. We get double that about for 1 million, and then 35% for 2 million. But I'm not seeing 2 million oysters. That's one thing.
Can I ask about the oysters? Question?
Yeah, can I I always take questions, and I will take them. But there's another table that follows from this one. I'll do that. It doesn't answer your question, but then I'll answer your question. Is that okay with you? Okay. All right. Then we did these combinations where we deployed 500,000 oysters. We doubled the flow. We reduced all lawn fertilizers. So we reduced half the wastewater. The thought was, what would be a reasonable thing to do? Well, deploying oysters doesn't really cost much. Doubling the channel flow doesn't cost much. Reduction in fertilizers doesn't cost anything. And reducing the wastewater by 50%. Why would we get 50%? Because all the nitrifying septic systems will remove half. Some will remove 80 or 90%. But then if we say 50%, we don't have to quibble about which one you buy and put in. So that seemed like reasonable, not because you don't need to have the septic system, but because the efficiency of the systems will determine really how many you have to do. If you get the 90%ers, then you don't need to put as many. And that gets you 60%. And that 60% right now, with the model as it's calibrated now, is ready for these words, good enough for now for planning. Because we're not going to refine it. It needs to be refined. But we need to get stakeholder input on other management options. We're not going to go spend a lot of time refining something that we give you and say, we didn't ask me, and then it ends up being right, we didn't ask you. And you say, what about this? And we say, good idea. And then we got to rerun the whole thing. So this is just to get us going, and we know that something on this order is going to get us where we want to go. This is not the answer. We're not saying that's the answer. We're saying go out and start putting the oysters in the pond. We're saying that this kind of combination, that kind of reduction is going to get you pretty much where you want to go. Our next phase in this whole project is to get this information, have those discussions, and develop a consensus action plan. Are we going to focus on flushing, wastewater, fertilizer? We're going to focus on really, what do you want? What's cost effective? Sewers are not cost effective. We don't need sewers. We can get there without them. So you develop the consensus plan, you check the model, and you find out if you hit the target. That's how DEP and EPA work. That's how you get your permit. They want to have some evidence that what you're proposing is going to hit the target. And this gives you the tool to determine it. We want to make sure that the rigorous management practices in the Eclipse Club golf course for their fertilizer turf water use are maintained, because they're doing a pretty good job now, lower than most golf courses in the region is their output per acre. And so we really want to make sure that nothing backslides on that. The town could consider requiring on-site denitrifying septic systems. I've been in this battle since they invented denitrifying septic systems. On older systems, basically as they need to be replaced, or within new homes that are built within the watershed. We're not talking about going out tomorrow, making everybody in the watershed put in the denitrifying system. That's not economically viable to do. Some places do it on sale. That's what sale. The other thing is we highly recommend that whatever the consensus plan is, that it is a stepwise implementation of actions. You don't go out and do them all at once. You go out and you do the increased flushing first, and then the monitoring program continues, and how much did that exactly work? Because no model's perfect. So you do it, and you look, and you'll say, oh, well, maybe we don't have to do all these other steps. And then you can look at the load reductions. This is really, we're focusing on septic and fertilizers, not getting rid of them completely, but that's what we're focusing on because they're more within the realm of what people can tolerate. And also we're looking at oysters if they're needed, right? And maybe something else we didn't look at. That's the whole point of developing a consensus plan. You don't know the other things that you'd be willing to do. So we need to get that into the plan. Okay, questions? You're up.
Okay, I would like to know whether oysters simply store the nitrogen or do they turn it into something else so that it doesn't, so that it reduces the nitrogen load? And if they just store the nitrogen, what happens when that oyster dies?
They also alter the nitrogen cycle of the pond and increases denitrification. So, because as they're feeding, they also are, so they're depositing some of the plant that haven't eaten on the bottom. They don't eat, they filter a lot out of the water, but they don't eat it all. They actually don't eat it. They eat less than half of it, a third of it. So they're casting that away because it's not palatable. And that falls to the bottom rather than hanging out in the pond for 105 days. And then the conditions in the sediment, what they have done is they've changed the deposition rate, changed the focus of things, and now you get more of that goes off as nitrogen gas than the normal gas. They stimulate their
So it
activities.
goes into the
Atmosphere,
atmosphere.
N2 gas, which is 78% of what we're doing. It's not something new. And it's in the water column all the time. N2 is dominant in the atmosphere. And it's in pond water now. It's non-toxic, doesn't have this effect because it's a gas. It takes energy to turn it into something bad. So, yes, John.
How many, we have an idea how many septic systems there are in this particular rural water area we're talking about?
Has it 200 or something? I mean,
That's interesting.
no, it's we counted it.
Yeah.
When I said we did a parcel analysis, we looked at every parcel to see how big the roofs were, the driveways were. They had everybody's on septic furnace. But if they had town water or well, we did all of that stuff. We derived the water use because what goes in the septic system has to come in first as fresh water, then some consumptive use. Not all of it goes out into the septic system, but 90% or so goes out into the septic system. You can determine wastewater flows if it's house out of the water meter. So we capture that data. We capture the water meter data through the two small little water and so we can determine wastewater flows too, just because it's cheap.
Have you been able to quantify the actual take from the oysters that you planted in there?
And
the viability of the oysters as well?
Well, here's the deal. The deal is that I didn't answer your question, this lady question properly, because the other part is, they store it in their bodies, you have to harvest them. You don't leave them in the pond. They're not that way, that's not how it's done. Most of the towns in the region are growing them for two reasons. One, they grow them for harvest and they sell them. Or now what they're doing is they're making commercial. Town starts with, they do all the permitting, all the viability stuff, then they get a lease to a commercial grower and it grows. Other ponds like Cockeast, they're only growing up to shorts, which means non-marketable size. Before this concept of using oysters for estuarine cleanup in southeastern Massachusetts, there wasn't a market for shorts in buildings. But now there's a market. There's a lot of ponds that are just being done and are highly contaminated with high nutrients, but also bacteria. You can't harvest them. You can't grow them up to harvest. So they're growing the shorts, and they sell those shorts, and the commercial growers will take that lease to sell those to other growers, or maybe their other leases, where they can grow them in 1 year market. And so there's a market for doing shorts now. And so, but the idea is you got to get rid of them. You can't leave them because then they then the positive effect diminishes by 80 or 90%. You're adding it up. But that's what people do, because they have value, even if they're in a contaminated area and small, we still have value.
So you want to get some data for show how much there's a reduction in the nitrogen from these oysters?
We have, my senior student is sitting there reaching the break. That's her PhD thesis.
Okay.
She's finishing up. It's on not just Cockeast Pond, but Lonnie's Pond, a few other ponds where oysters will be used for this purpose, where we quantify their growth, deposition, change in the sediment, the whole shebang. Just like, you don't want me to go through a whole pond talk, do you?
No, I'm just curious if you have some data for.
Yeah, no, we have it. This is a big deal. But that is still underway
Okay.
because the
Should
project.
we continue?
Oh yeah, we still look. We have to upgrade the numerical model. We need to get input from consensus to get the management plan done. We still have working with EPA. We still have to work with them, even though we do work here to help you guys. We still have to work back with them on did this work or not. Part of the thing that affects the survivability though in growth rate is the salinity. So if the pond increases its flushing, the positive effects of oysters will be increased as well.
Yeah, so because I'm, Nitrate Pond, I'm very familiar with the work they're doing there, and I think the salinity is too high actually for viability of those oysters.
This will never get that high.
I know, so they are not, they've done a lot of that, and they're actually using it more as a lair for other animals to live on and everything, but there's not a good survivability there.
Right. My thinking to you would be, that's right. Remember, I at the University of Massachusetts, remember that?
Yeah, but this is funny, right? We're all, ecosystems don't go across it. They do
No.
across
I'm making a joke about fluoride because I'm in UMass and we partners, we do all this work. Inside.
Oh.
Yeah.
So if we get sea level rise of say 3 to 6 feet in the next 50 to 70 years, we won't have to worry about flushing in this pond.
Whatever you said, years, 50 years or whatever, that is not going to happen. Here's why I know that. Because the projections have been that it will increase up as high as 4 feet in 100 years. And that projection was made in 1981. It hasn't happened. It was going to happen, and then now, 81, 91, 2001, almost 2021, 4 years later, we have not seen that increase in sea level rise rate. Sea level rise is rising, and it's been rising in this region since for the last 18,000 years. It's been going up. But you're talking about a change in the rate, and if you're going to project that in 100 years it will have gone up 4 feet, then in the last 40 years it should have gone up, it's not linear.
It's not linear.
Except the rate right now is linear, and so therefore it hasn't happened yet. And I've studied this. I'm a wetland scientist as well. That's where I started. In 1981, we got a grant from NOAA to study sea level rise rates, because wetlands are the reason we know sea level rises. Salt marshes are why we know that sea level rises, because salt marshes have to stay at the level of sea level. And so if you go down through the marshes, you go, hey, wait a minute. There's 6-8 feet of marsh here. That means that at some point sea level will have to be 8 feet lower, or the land drop, but in this case it did. Okay? So it's just not happening. But we do plan for it in our engineering. We're going to plan for that. And right now, the engineering shift has been about 1.5 times per 100. Yeah.
So we've now, along the beach area, built up sand dunes. The community has built up sand dunes. And that may prevent the occasional inundation of salt water, kind of hurricane or a big storm. If we have not put those sand dunes there, would we get more inundations from?
You get more frequent inundations,
Yeah.
but you still get inundations. And I do believe that we've seen. Did we see a blow through in like a path where we're going to wash over, small wash over? So, I mean, it's not, on Gulf Farm, it's hard to believe that the 1991 hurricane bottom did get some wash.
You don't want to have overwash events to maintain the flushing of your problem.
Yeah. But, you know, and the cheapest thing is, let's face it, the pipe's going to cost very little money because you already done it, so it's expensive.
Does the use of groundwater under the pond impact any of this picture? 70 people are on wells under the pond.
Well, I'm not, no, it's, I don't think the impact is enough to really screw things up. Okay, it's very little water when you look at how much rain falls on our land. You first, and then, sir, then you say.
I'm very familiar with the Cockeast Pond since the early 50s. It's always been regarded as freshwater habitat. That freshwater flow is turtles, painted turtles, and subterranean snakes, and gillfish, and freshwater rooted plants, cattails. You didn't get any fouling pain on your boat because
It's fresh water.
there was no marine growth. Every now and then a hurricane would come along and the ocean would wash over the pond. That seemed to change things.
Well, but you would have to really know what to look for to see the change. And most people aren't out there counting animals and fish every day. So it does change things. I do believe your freshwater statement, though. That makes total sense because we have data that shows that, yeah, it was down around 1 part per thousand, half a part per thousand, which is very fresh. But then when you put the new culvert in, it jumped up. There's no longer anywhere near fresh.
That's what I was, another thing I was going to ask. Is a new culvert permanently change things?
Until we change the culvert, yeah. And I'm not being facetious. I mean, until we change the culvert, one way or the other. The part of the reason here, though, was that culvert was put in with herring pads. Because we have a herring, a real problem in this region. And so they're trying to increase the spawning areas, or repair, restore the spawning areas that used to be that aren't anymore. And that was what the major driver for this, the UMass, was major help in getting that done. I wasn't involved with that at all.
Another question, where can somebody get copies, see copies of some of your graphs?
Well, I will give this report to Bert, or this, I'm going to clean it up a little bit, because there's a lot of junk at the end, that is after the questions. So I'll give it to Bert.
Actually, the entire technical memo is available on the Westport River Watershed Alliance's webpage. If you go on the top to the Cockeast Pond link, you click it, it's at the top of the page. It's a 96-page report, so it's PDF format.
But remember that it's still underway, there's more work to be done.
Yeah.
This is like the end of phase 1, phase 2, and now we're going to more to do. So it's not totally.
You used an example of the increasing flushing. Without any, well, anyway, you're saying that
Without
if you
even-
increased it to Cockeast Pond by 2 times or 2.7 times, is that essentially something that would be mostly controlled by, in terms of your thinking, maybe it's not your sense, you're not looking for us specific new solutions, but by the width of the herring ditch increasing by about the same, by twice or 2.7 times? I know that's, I just was curious.
What we did is for that scenario, which is just one way to do it, not the only way to do it, we decided to just widen the existing opening, which is quite small actually. And by doubling it, we almost got a doubling of flow. By increasing it fourfold, we only got a 2.7 flow because it's not linear, it's only stable.
No, that's great, because I know some places in Rhode Island, down in Narragansett, have actually really increased drastically.
No, we would hardly notice.
If you do actually implement the widening of the inlet, there will be a more careful study. This study was just, okay, take the existing inlet bathymetry and double the width, fourfold the width. If you're going to do a replacement of that inlet, you do a more careful study of, okay, what exactly is the geometry of the new culvert going in, what exchange is that by, and it just gets, you get more precise.
We can
I
optimize.
think guys too, really, big time for everything. all over.
We would just so we can finish,
Sure.
drive up basically home, we would optimize the inlet. We don't just do something, we go and we say, okay, we need to get a certain size, and then we optimize it to get what we want. Now, we can only increase it so much because of the tide and such, and the elevation of the pond. But right now, this is just course tune. Now I have to define it.
I'm just curious, Westport has a large summer residence, so they produce definitely more wastewater in the summer here than in the winter.
Oh, yeah.
Does that really affect also the ponds and streams, or is it the delay such that it evens out?
Yeah, what happens is they're not all the same distance from the pond,
No.
and so the distance changes time,
Yeah.
and so all those different delays make it more flow.
And the flow doesn't, it's not in the
Doesn't-
meter
you don't
tube
get
where it
pulse.
flows out.
Yeah.
It's more like months or even more.
Oh, yes, because
Okay.
groundwater's not flowing even a foot a year. So here, it's certainly in, down here.
So it's just a cumulative effect, not
Yeah.
that.
But we count for that. One of the reasons we get the water use from the water district, so then we know who's in the house and when, to get seasonality of that.
Mindful of the parachuting cats of Borneo, which if you Google that, you have it. Has there been any evidence that you can accelerate on health by introducing benthic species as you actually address nitrogen?
What happens is that unlike a lot of organisms, marine organisms tend to put their larvae up into the water column. And if we have the inlet exchanging better with the Westport River, even if we don't, those larvae will come in naturally. We find areas that are fairly restricted that all of the animals all die. In the summer because it's hot and oxygen goes away, but then in the fall, when the new larvae set, you're back to a highly diverse community. But that's special to marine, coastal marine organisms.
Just clarifying about the oysters, say we chose a 1 million option, that's 1 million every year, is that the timing?
It's even worse than that. What you do is if you're really going to use this tool, you would put in 500,000 in the first year, or up to 1 year. Then you put in 500,000 the second year, and the first year ones stay. So then the second year you got 2 million, but you got 500,000 1 year, and then you get 500,000 2 year. And then you harvest in the third year the old ones, let the young ones go another year, put in new ones, and so you get a sustainable million in that one. So really, you're not going to put in 500,000 a year. You're taking out.
One thing I haven't heard any discussion of is the rising of water temperature in the pond and in the river. And whether or not that creates a situation for effective nitrogen to increases the water temperature.
So well, first of all, you can potentially increase biological activity, which is also affecting flux by warming, for example. So yes, you can increase the recycling. You can also stress the heck out of organisms if the temperature gets too high. Okay. If you increase the kind of flushing again, you bring in colder water, so you tend to offset a little bit of that temperature, depending on how much you can bring in. You only bring in a little bit, it's not going to have any effect at all. But water temperature is something in and of itself that we worry about, independent of any other factors. And the state regs even have recognition that if you're going to discharge to a water body, like a pipe, you get a sauna, or whatever, you cannot change the water temperature within certain limits. If the temperature is low, you can increase it in centimeter or centigrade, 1 degree or 2 degree, whatever. If it's already up high, like 28, you can't change it. So those are taken into account. But this is a very shallow pond, it's very eutrophic, it's supposed to be warm. And I mean, we look at that.
Here's my sort of second question. Water flow. In the state of New Hampshire, we have these wonderful lakes that are all crystal clear and everything, surrounded by properties with septic systems. And I hear nothing but this.
They're freshwater lakes and they're controlled by nitrogen, by phosphorus.
That's why we got rid of phosphorus-based laundry detergents a couple decades ago. Phosphorus was
It's a different
freshwater system.
We also do freshwater pond restoration.
So now let's say the Cockeast Pond was purely fresh water.
And it would be phosphorus. But there's so much phosphorus in the pond now it probably is not going to get down where you're going. You're going to have to do a treatment. Usually what happens is when you go to freshwater management of a brackish pond, you have to still do an initial treatment to lock the phosphorus in the sediment that's gone into it. Usually, not always.
In your example on wastewater,
And we just did that in the county. Converted something back into fresh water. So we need to worry about nitrogen.
in your example on wastewater septic system transition, it was kind of based on new construction.
Yeah,
It seems to be a very slow approach. Is there an example where there have been some sort of cooperative or
Oh, yeah,
attachments to existing?
Nobody's going to volunteer to have to pay the money to have their septic system checked. Well, no, that's not true. Some people will pay to have their septic system retrofitted. It does happen a lot. We wouldn't have to super high level. And so usually there has to be some inducement.
It seems to me that many years ago, when there wasn't fresh water in the harbor area, they put together a joint stock company or something for drilling or aquifers or rainwater. And it was done in a cooperative basis.
You know, what happens is when it happens inducement can be for the town recognizing restoration, restore a lot of things. It costs millions and millions and millions of dollars. They could set up a revolving fund for zero interest loans. Marshall County has that. Just for normal septic system. You took it in. Let's see in front of you. But they have those types of funds. That's one type of inducement. And people go with that. They do better sometimes part of that. Sometimes the town just says, sorry, over the next 10 years or 20 years, we're going to replace them also on sale of the house like they do now with the size of your septic tank. The sale of the house, it has to pass a septic system for size, and if it doesn't pass that size, you have to replace it. Those create a real pain, right? But if that's why the county has an environment, which is all of Cape Cod, has this other fund, say, okay, if you fall into that hole, you can help. And that works really well. People want to do it. At least in this room. Can they come?
Enough people have left so I can ask this question.
If I put on glasses and I take them off, the nose and mustache should not go.
This is a serious question. What if you mentioned oxygenation? What if we in huge oxygenators in the pond?
It's in a pond that size, it's very difficult to get enough to do that practice, which is done sometimes in small ponds and lakes. The problem with that is not, first you're going to put them in, you have to maintain them. And that's where it falls down. You work for a year and then that's it, or 2 years. Who's going to
Pay the electric bill.
And who's going to also go out when something breaks and have the money to put in a new one? Because, it is kind of tough. But and nobody's, and virtually no one is doing it in estuaries. They're doing it in lakes.
Small.
Yeah, usually small is really work. Okay? Can we poop you out?